I'm from the Ohio State University. So in my breakout room, we started by, filling out the whiteboards. We spent some time doing that, and then we spent some time kind of discussing what we put down. So I'm going to try to cover some of the highlights because we didn't get to talk about everything that was written on our whiteboard. But I think the big thing that we talked about for the first topic of what barriers do we anticipate from using some of these tools, especially these like AI tools we've been talking about. Really, we just talked about issues involving, I think, like training and having everybody that's using these tools to understand them and understand their limitations, understanding exactly what the tool does and why. And then if these tools are kind of like reflecting the overall goals of the admissions of the university and making sure that everyone's kind of understanding these tools. And then on top of that, we talked about the need for like continuous improvement of these tools. So instead of just kind of getting these tools and just going with them year to year, to really using maybe some of the time that they save to reflect on them and make sure we're continuously improving them and improving what they can do. And then another big issue that we talked about with these tools are issues around transparency and how there were some stories from some of the folks that have used similar tools of like not getting the information on how exactly they work and why. So again, with this training, there also comes this issue of transparency. To move on to the next discussion topic, what are some other tools that we'd like to see? So this is one that we didn't get into too much detail about in our breakout room, but we did. I'm reading some of the things that we have written, and there are some ideas about tools that can help inform advising. So going beyond like the grades issues when we're talking to like how students are advised, and finding tools that could help students pick the best colleges for them. So kind of more of this idea of match of like having tools for students while they're applying to help them, understand what are their odds of getting in? Is it worth the admissions fee? What can they do to like improve their applications? And then the last discussion topic of like, what would be the perfect admission system? We have a lot of things written down here, so I'll try to summarize, but there was like a mixture of like the different things to be looking at, like taking into account, obviously, of the high school portfolio, context of the high school, having interviews, annotated high school transcript, reference letters. There's also notes about here, making sure we're providing an equity lens, having tools that we could help train recruiters to read and to reduce bias. So making sure we're having admission policies that reduce these sorts of biases. And then again, these ideas of the perfect system would obviously address any issues with transparency. And let's see, I'm just checking my notes, making sure I'm not missing anything. And then there was also issues, I think, of talking about stakeholders. So in a perfect admission system, not one group would be controlling like the process. So you get input from lots of different stakeholders. Okay, I will stop talking now. And if I missed anything, if folks from my group want to chime in, that would be wonderful. If not, we can move on. So thank you.
Okay, my turn. I was rewarded to become the speaker because I spoke so much in the session. So, it's amazing what you volunteer for. This note won't necessarily be in a chronological order of what we approached, but we sort of considered more the after the admissions function. So you've already got this group of students that have been admitted. How can you best service them? How can you best respond to the characteristics that they've had? So we looked at, what about the faculty culture in the department? How can that reflect what the incoming students are like? And we sort of talked about the different characteristics of faculties from 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and how they've sort of evolved and what's the background for each of those participants in there. and how can the current faculty members in a department respond to these 18-year-olds that perhaps are coming from a culture that they have no connection with, and how to do that. Is there a way to sort of help them understand what characteristics these incoming freshmen have? So besides consulting the Benoit respond of what your freshmen look like, maybe it'd be good to have admissions give a briefing to the faculty to say these are what the characteristics are of this new class coming in. That might be good. We also looked a little bit at graduate students. How can this effective AI reviewing of graduate students be reflective of the cultures that they're coming from? I mean, if we're doing EID on our own situations here, to some extent, a student coming from Southern Florida going to a school in the Washington State area may find it just as bad as coming from Japan or Europe or something. And so how can we reflect that review of graduate students and understand what their cultural biases are and coming in and make it work? And then we dabbled in a little bit of total heresy by talking about how could AI in the admissions process talk to the ultimate admission function in the university, i.e. the admission of faculty. How do you bring in faculty to match what the disciplines are? And I had a story about coming to my institution when we were basically a teaching level 2 sort of institution, and now we're a D1, a research 1 rather institution, and the transitions that have occurred in those 20 some years, and how our students are basically from North Dakota or the upper Midwest still, but how does that reflect what we do in the classroom and what we're trying to get done in our own professional careers, and how does that really respond to the push of new faculty in the first 6 years to get tenure, and then to start worrying about the other things that are going on campus? Because in most institutions, it's like 40% research, 40% teaching, 10% outreach is what your contracts are written for. But the reality is the PT&E committees are looking at publishment, and as long as you're not mentally abusing your students, a lot of times it's okay. Teaching, they'll be all right. And we also then kind of circled back to this department culture. How do you get a department culture that's going to respond well to the influxes of faculty members, to the influxes of students, and meld everything in the pot and come out with a well-educated graduate that can go out and influence industry? And one of the factors is that more than 80% of our undergraduates, our bachelor's degree students, are going into industry, and 90% of our faculty members are PhD holders, and a large proportion of those are pure academics. They've never been outside the academy, and they don't have a connection with industry except on a consulting basis. And that is not the day-to-day punch your time card kind of routine. And so how do we work with that? So that's how we worked. We heard about Rutgers' effort to try to review their faculty, and how faculty reviews may in fact move the scale forward a little bit, and help faculty become more aware of their teaching role as well as the research role and the evolution of everything to try to get the product out the door. So that's where we were. And I'll try to take better notes next time.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple of, any comments from anyone else? You can go ahead and put it in the chat or raise your hand. I think these were great. Thank you both. This was some great comments, great discussions. Yeah, I think that this AI and faculty recruitment is something to think about. Definitely. So with that, we'll wrap up the report back, and I'll introduce Daryl Pines and bring him up for some concluding remarks.
Okay, you hear me? Okay, thank you, Beth. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great workshop. And so I'm just going to summarize kind of what I think we heard. I put together some charts, so I'm going to end up sharing my screen. Let's see if I can get this right. And let's do that. How do you bring that up to the top screen? Hold on for a second. Go back. Try that again. Hopefully you can see that. I'll let move that over. Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. So thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be with you for the last couple of days. I'm just going to do some highlights of what we think we heard. So here's an outline of my little short presentation. What the goals and the objectives of the workshop were. Then I'm going to thank a number of people, and then just highlight some brief thoughts and highlights for the whole week, the whole 3 days, and then present a missions cloud to you, and then final actions for attendees, and then some reading materials. You got some homework. So this is what we were trying to do. Beth, Katie, and a number of us were working together to help develop the goals and objectives for this workshop. So the goals were to recognize institutions that are effectively diversifying engineering education using admissions policies, to provide guidance to institutions working to advance diversity, and to define directions for future research on best practices, metrics, and policies, and how they fit into the largest system of recruiting and retaining engineering students from all backgrounds. We ended up representing 8 exemplary programs that you heard from over the last couple of days. And of course, the workshop was held now. It was actually supposed to be held a little bit earlier in the spring. And then we'll have workshop proceedings that will be disseminated in the fall. I want to thank a number of folks. So first, Dr. John Anderson, first of all, for his welcome remarks. Also, of course, Beth Katie, without her leadership, this could not have happened, her ability to write the proposal that went into NSF. Our colleague, Darul West, who's been supporting us and coordinating the event while we've been here. And Dr. Christine Grant, who's the program director at NSF under the Broadening Participation in Engineering under the EEC at NSF. And then finally, my colleagues, Dr. Beth Holloway from Purdue University, Dr. Teresa Maldonado from University of California, Dr. Beth Myers from the University of Colorado Boulder, and Dr. Andrew Williams from the University of Kansas. This team has been working for about almost 2 years now because of the pandemic to get to this point to have this workshop. So I'm grateful for their collaboration. And of course, to all of our panelists, keynote speakers, and workshop attendees. So first of all, congratulations to you all. I hope you had some fun. It's number one. I think I had a lot of fun. I hope you learned something about policies, best practices, or research over the past 3 days. And I hope you had a chance to meet a few people in the lounges or in some of the breakout sessions and get to know people who might collaborate with you going forward on research proposals. Here's a couple of highlights from day one. So of course we had John Anderson, and he talked about really what the National Academy is all about and what engineering is all about, which is the ability to develop talent that will go out in the world and solve grand challenges that we're facing. He also talked about his commitment to social justice, including the NAE's new Committee on Racial Justice and Equity, which comprises mostly NAE members. Christine Grant came and talked to us about the concept of broadening participation, which we're all very familiar with at NSF, but she also told us that she had just launched a new postdoctoral program to support future prospective faculty at our institutions as they transition post-pandemic. And then we were introduced to our first panelist group on higher education admission system. We had a number of great speakers, And some of the highlights from that first panel was we learned about test optional that many of us are very much aware of now. Maybe not all of us were aware of test blind, but now we are definitely aware of test blind thanks to Andrew. And about numerous studies suggesting that standardized tests do not correlate with student success and outcomes, that is retention and graduation. We also learned a little bit about holistic and comprehensive application review from our colleague from the UC system. So this was the beginning of our first day and first panel. Also on the first day, we were fortunate to hear from admissions policies and programs from several other colleagues from a variety of 4 different institutions: Texas A&M, California State University Long Beach, Rutgers University, and Iowa State University. Some of the highlights here were we learned about various programs being implemented at various universities. I think the quote that really stood out for me was Dr. Ghoshani's quote when he said, "No student is average. We must meet students where they are as learners and adapt services to help them all excel." I think it was a telltale sign about what this whole workshop is all about. Then we moved into our very first breakout session, number 1. How are the policies you heard about today affecting your work or institution? What policies would you like to implement? What barriers do you see to implementing these policies? And how would you overcome these barriers? Then we moved into day 2. And again, another great group of speakers. We had two sessions back to back, actually 3 speaker sessions. So first one was on transfer 3+2 programs with a great group of speakers. And then we also had best practices in admissions. So let me just talk about panel 3 first and some of the highlights. Of course, all the panelists talked about successful partnerships and collaborations with other institutions that are feeders to their 4-year institutions was key to success. Barriers to success included not common course numbering, but also ensuring that proper mapping into various fields of engineering and fields of study between the primary institution and the secondary receiver institution. And then in this case, another great quote that came from this group was that Bob Pieri noted, "We must again meet learners where they are." And I really took that to heart for the group that he was working with at North Dakota State. And then in panel 4, best practices in admission. And this is where we heard a number of great ideas, and I just want to summarize them there at the bottom of the screen. Summer Bridge. We all know that Summer Bridge is a great transition program into the first year and has, in most universities, a literally 95 to 98% first year retention, and then ultimately a 6-year graduation rate that's pretty high. We heard about the redshirt program from both Colorado Boulder and from University of Washington. We learned about mental health support resources during the question and answer, how that was an important added value of support services needed for most of our students at risk. In addition, holistic support programs, and this was now Tanya Ennis' great quote, "If you admit them, then you must keep them." I love that quote, Tanya. It was a great quote from you. And this holistic support is really important. But let's not forget that financial support through completion, as Beth Myers has alluded to in the chat, is also equally important. And then, of course, the nuances of your individual state. Working within your state admission and policies is always different state to state across the United States. That was, then we went into our final group of speakers, panel 5 of day 2, which was the research group of speakers from Cincinnati, Dr. Terry Reed, Florida International, University of Michigan, University of Southern California, with Teresa as the moderator. This was an exciting panel. We learned a lot. We learned that there is bias in admissions thanks to the presentation by Dr. Reed, and that it may even require a comprehensive review with the possibility of changing campus policies. Dr. Reed uncovered that leadership and GPA were strong indicators of success for women students, as well as strong verbal scores in standardized tests. Several panelists discussed the benefits and challenges associated with holistic application review. Dr. Pulselt suggested that there are 4 main characteristics of holistic review: comprehensiveness, contextualization, systematic, and equity-mindedness. These were very important characteristics for us to consider as we take a look at this at our own institutions. The challenges that they alluded to included difficult to execute because humans are required to do the review process, requires partnerships with enrollment management at your institution. And then we went into our second breakout session, which was with the following questions. What barriers do you anticipate in implementing the practices and research you heard today, how would you overcome these barriers, and where should future research on admissions focus? So some of the reporting out is that how do we change the mindset of admissions officers, administrators, and faculty? How do we communicate to all stakeholder groups to have open and honest conversations about the admissions policies and procedures? And then there were some comments that came out of, could we look at the military promotion process? Is there something to glean there that is helpful in our review process of holistic review? And then another colleague mentioned that we should possibly insert, like they have done at Michigan, an adversity index to evaluate candidates and see their potential for success at your institution. And then we went into day 3. And this was the big AI, data science, machine learning group of speakers that we just heard from earlier today. Great group of speakers, very, very exciting. But the primary sort of highlights that came out of that discussion was we should all be very, very cautious of using data to inform our decisions. The humans must always be in the middle of the process. We need to make sure that the models are validated. Data and AI, ML can simply be a tool to assist human decision makers in the admissions process. Remember to ask all the right questions before using this technology. Dr. Conrad Tucker talked about ground truth labels are coming from humans. So that means that there's inherent bias in that ground truth because it's human derived. So we need to be very careful again in using bias and data to influence decisions. And then finally, Brad mentioned a very interesting quote, be careful with ed tech because your decisions and processes are still legally bound. Brad's quote is, whatever someone is showing you in the valley, and dial it down to 17% of it being true. So I thought that was a great quote for the AI ML discussion. And then we had our final breakout session of this workshop, series of workshop panels. And so what are the barriers do you anticipate with using these tools? What other tools would you like to see? If you could create a perfect admissions system, what would be the elements of that? And you just heard from both Bob and Amy who presented out. I took some quick notes on that before going right to this session. And the barriers issuing involving tool training and their limitations, understanding tools, and do they reflect the mission of the university, the need for continuous improvement in these tools, and of course, transparency of the use of these tools in our admissions process. Other tools, could we use other tools to help inform advising, to do better advising? Tools that can help students create the best match and best school for them while they're searching for different schools during the admissions process. And then what about a perfect admissions system? Is this even possible? Could we take into account high school portfolios? There is this concept of electronic portfolios, especially for engineering, where students can demonstrate what they've done during their high school experiences that may inform admissions officers that they are ready to do engineering at your institutions. And of course, other things like reference letters and transcripts, and then tools to train recruiters to reduce their bias in the application review process. So if you kind of boil all this up, what have we been doing over this last couple of days? I kind of decided to create a word cloud, which talks about many of the issues that we've been trying to get at: holistic admissions, inclusion, equity-based practices, evidence. I mean, most of the things that we discussed are in this sort of word cloud, and there's still lots to parse through in our admissions processes and policies at our institution. But I think this workshop was a good start in this discussion. And the next thing that we are going to require of you are the following. We want your feedback on the entire workshop. Any insights, and it's good to do this pretty quickly, like within the next 24 hours. If you can get this information to either me or Beth, Katie, our evaluators at Karen Peterman Consulting will be sending out a link to an evaluation survey next Tuesday on June 1st. So think about your thoughts now, and then when you get that link, please, to the best of your ability, respond to the survey questions. Thank you so much. And then all the materials for the 2021 workshop will be available on the e-poster board website. So it's even these charts will be posted there. And the final comment is to enjoy your summer and continue to make a difference for your students. And then I've got a little reading for you, and go to infinity and beyond. But before that, we go there. These are some of the books that were recommended by some of our colleagues that I thought you guys would want to have at least a look at. Andrew recommended the first 3 books. which helps us understand how admissions has been done and how it needs a review, and holistic review is probably the direction of the future. And then Dr. Posalt talked about equity in science. And then there was another discussion about, in the AI ML session, about this weapons of math destruction and how one can use data in a negative way if you don't understand what the biases are in your assumptions in using that data. So all of these books are good reading material for all of you. And with that, I want to thank you all for being a part of this workshop. It's been a pleasure to work with you all. And hopefully we'll have this proceedings out to you sometime in the fall. And please, please respond to the survey when you get the link. Thanks so much.